The wilderness has a way of healing the soul, or so Linda Matthews hoped. Alone in a remote Montana cabin, her life felt as barren as the snow-covered forest beyond her window. A recent divorce, the loss of her beloved dog, and the whispers of an empty home left her questioning her place in the world. But then, on a cold December day, a faint, desperate cry broke the silence of the woods. Following the sound, Linda stumbled upon something extraordinary. A young, injured bobcat trapped and helpless. The golden eyes that locked onto hers carried a mix of fear, hope, and something deeper. What began as an act of compassion turned into a journey neither of them could have imagined. Because sometimes, the most powerful connections aren't the ones we seek. They're the ones that find us. This is the story of survival, transformation, and a bond that crossed the line between human and wild. And what happened 2 years later would change everything Linda thought she knew about love and second chances.
The November wind whistled through the bare branches, carrying with it the last remnants of autumn's golden leaves. Linda Matthews stood at her cabin window, watching as nature prepared itself for another Montana winter. At 52, she had thought her life would be different, filled with the laughter of grandchildren, perhaps, or at least the comfort of a decades-long marriage. Instead, here she was, starting over in a remote cabin 20 miles outside of Whitefish, Montana, with only the whispers of the forest to keep her company. 3 months had passed since she'd signed the divorce papers, ending her 28-year marriage to Richard. The ink had barely dried when she discovered he'd already moved in with Sarah, his 35-year-old dental hygienist. The betrayal still stung, but not as much as losing Max, their elderly golden retriever, who had passed away just weeks after the divorce was finalized. It felt like the universe was determined to strip away every comfort she had ever known. The cabin had been an impulse purchase, funded by her portion of the divorce settlement. Her children, both grown and living on opposite coasts, thought she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But after 3 decades of being somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's dental office manager, Linda craved the silence that only wilderness could provide. She'd found work at the local library in Whitefish, a part-time position that allowed her to spend 3 days a week surrounded by books and quiet conversations. The other 4 days, she spent exploring the forests around her cabin, learning the rhythms of the wilderness, and slowly, painfully, rediscovering who Linda Matthews was when she stood alone. It was during one of these solitary walks in early December that she first heard the sound. A weak, pitiful cry that seemed out of place among the usual forest chorus. Linda paused, her hiking boots crunching in the light dusting of snow as she tried to locate the source of the distress. The cry came again, leading her off the familiar trail and into a dense thicket of pine and spruce. There, huddled beneath a fallen log, lay a young bobcat. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, its spotted fur still carrying the fuzzy softness of kittenhood. One of its back legs was caught in what appeared to be an illegal trap, the metal teeth biting cruelly into flesh. Linda's heart clenched. She had seen bobcats before, always from a distance, always wild and proud. But this one's eyes, large and golden, met hers with a mix of fear and desperate hope that transcended species. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, slowly kneeling in the snow. "What happened to you?" The rational part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous. Even a young bobcat could inflict serious damage. She should call the wildlife authorities, wait for professionals. But the temperature was dropping rapidly, and the sun would set in a few hours. By the time help arrived, the kitten might not survive the cold. Drawing on years of experience handling difficult cats at the local shelter where she volunteered, Linda removed her thick wool scarf and carefully approached the trapped animal. The bobcat kitten watched her, too weak to fight, but still alert enough to track her movements. "I'm going to help you," she said softly, using the same soothing tone she'd once used with Max during thunderstorms. "But you have to trust me, just a little." It took nearly an hour of patient maneuvering, but Linda managed to wrap the scarf around the bobcat's head, keeping those sharp teeth safely contained while she worked on the trap. Her fingers grew numb with cold as she struggled with the mechanism, but finally, mercifully, it released its grip. The leg was badly injured, but not broken, a miracle considering the brutality of the trap. The bobcat, however, was severely dehydrated and thin, suggesting it had been trapped for at least a day or two. "You're coming home with me?" Linda decided, knowing it was probably insane but unable to leave the creature to its fate. She wrapped the kitten carefully in her jacket, creating a secure bundle that protected both of them. The bobcat, whether from exhaustion or some innate understanding of her intentions, remained surprisingly calm during the 40-minute trek back to her cabin. Once home, Linda converted her mudroom into a makeshift recovery ward, laying down old blankets and setting up a litter box with sand from her garden. She used her first aid kit to clean and dress the wound, grateful for the wilderness first aid course she'd taken when she first moved to Montana. "You need a name," she told the bobcat as she finished bandaging its leg. The kitten had remained remarkably stoic throughout the procedure, watching her with those intelligent golden eyes. "How about Sam? It suits you. Strong but gentle." That first night, Linda barely slept, checking on Sam every few hours. She offered water and small pieces of the chicken she'd planned for dinner, which he accepted cautiously. By morning, she had already fallen in love with his fierce spirit and gentle demeanor. The next few weeks passed in a blur of veterinary research, careful feeding schedules, and wound care. Linda found herself grateful for the internet connection she'd insisted on having installed, spending hours researching bobcat rehabilitation and proper wildlife care. She knew what she was doing wasn't exactly legal. Private citizens weren't supposed to keep wildlife without proper permits, but she couldn't bring herself to turn Sam over to authorities just yet, not while he was still so vulnerable. As December melted into January, Sam's leg healed remarkably well. He graduated from the mudroom to having free reign of the cabin's enclosed back porch, where Linda had created an environment that would help him maintain his wild instincts while recovering. She made sure to minimize direct contact, though her heart ached each time she had to resist the urge to pet him or offer comfort beyond what was necessary for his care. It was during this time that Linda began to notice something extraordinary about Sam. Unlike most wild animals, who typically remain defensive and distant even in captivity, Sam showed an unusual level of intelligence and awareness in his interactions with her. He would watch her through the porch windows as she went about her daily routines, his head tilting curiously when she talked to herself, a habit she developed during her months of solitude. One particularly cold night in February, Linda woke to the sound of something scratching at her bedroom window. She found Sam perched on the outside sill, seemingly seeking shelter from the brutal mountain storm that had blown in. Against her better judgment, but unable to resist those pleading eyes, she let him in. That night became a turning point in their relationship. Sam curled up on the rug near her bed, not quite tame but no longer entirely wild, existing in some impossible space between. Linda lay awake for hours, watching the rise and fall of his spotted flanks, wondering if this was what second chances looked like. Messy and complicated and nothing like you'd expected. As winter began to loosen its grip on the mountains, Linda knew she had to face the reality of Sam's situation. He was growing stronger every day, his injured leg now barely showing a limp. More importantly, he was showing signs of his wild nature. Stalking birds through the porch windows, practicing his pouncing skills on falling snowflakes, displaying the natural behaviors that would be crucial to his survival. It was during one of her library shifts that Linda overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two regular patrons were discussing a new wildlife rehabilitation center that had opened just outside of Kalispell, about an hour's drive away. The center specialized in preparing captured or injured wild animals for release back into their natural habitats. That evening, Linda sat on her porch, watching Sam practice his hunting skills on a pile of leaves blown in by the wind. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she made the call to the wildlife center. It was time. Sam deserved a chance at a real life, not this in-between existence she'd created for him. The wildlife officers who came to collect Sam were kind but firm. They explained the protocols for rehabilitation and release, assuring Linda that they would do everything possible to ensure Sam's successful return to the wild. As they carefully loaded his transport cage into their truck, Linda felt as though her heart was being torn from her chest all over again. "You did the right thing," Officer Sarah Jensen told her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He's young enough that he hasn't lost his wild instincts. We'll make sure he knows how to hunt and survive before we release him." The next few months were harder than Linda had anticipated. She threw herself into her library work, took up hiking again, and tried to fill the Sam-shaped hole in her life with new routines. She followed the rehabilitation center's updates religiously, learning that Sam had successfully completed their program and had been released in a protected area about 15 miles from her cabin. Life went on. Linda planted a garden that spring, started a book club at the library, and slowly began to feel less like a woman who had lost everything and more like someone who was building something new. She still missed Sam fiercely, but she took comfort in knowing he was where he belonged, living the life he was meant to live. Then, one morning in early summer, nearly 2 years after she'd first found Sam in that trap, Linda stepped onto her porch to water her hanging baskets and found a freshly killed rabbit placed carefully by her door. At first, she assumed it was the work of one of the many predators that roamed the area. But something about the deliberate placement, the way it seemed more like an offering than a dropped kill, made her heart race. She began paying more attention to the sounds around her cabin, especially in the early morning and late evening hours. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of movement in the underbrush, or hear the distinct sound of large paws on her porch when she was inside. Then the gifts began appearing regularly: rabbits, squirrels, even the occasional grouse, always placed in the same spot by her door. One dawn in late August, Linda woke early to watch the sunrise from her porch, a habit she developed during her months with Sam. As the first rays of light painted the mountains gold, she saw him, larger now, more muscular, but with the same intelligent golden eyes she remembered. Sam sat at the edge of her clearing, watching her with that familiar head tilt. "Hello, old friend," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Sam didn't approach, maintaining a respectful distance that spoke of his restored wild nature. But he didn't run either. Instead, he settled into a comfortable position, his tail wrapped around his paws, and they watched the sunrise together. From that day forward, Sam became a regular but distant presence in Linda's life. He would appear every few weeks, sometimes leaving gifts, sometimes simply watching from the forest's edge. He never tried to return to his semi-tame state, and Linda never attempted to recapture the closeness they'd once shared. Instead, their relationship evolved into something perhaps more meaningful, a connection between two beings who had helped each other heal and now shared a mutual respect and understanding. Word of Linda and Sam's unique relationship began to spread through the small community. At first, some were skeptical, even concerned about having a wild bobcat regularly visiting a residential area, albeit a remote one. But as time passed and Sam showed no aggression toward humans, their story became something of a local legend. Linda's children, who had once worried about their mother's isolation, now visited more frequently, drawn by the possibility of catching a glimpse of the famous bobcat. Her daughter Emma, an environmental lawyer in Seattle, was particularly moved by the story and began working on legislation to ban the type of trap that had nearly killed Sam. The library where Linda worked started a successful children's reading program called Sam's Story Hour, where Linda would share tales of wildlife and conservation with young readers. She never embellished her story with Sam. The truth was remarkable enough on its own. Instead, she used their experience to teach children about respecting wildlife and the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries with wild animals. 5 years after finding Sam in that trap, Linda sat at her computer, putting the finishing touches on a children's book she'd written about their story. The manuscript, The Bobcat Who Came Back, had already attracted interest from several publishers. Linda planned to donate a portion of any proceeds to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center that had helped prepare Sam for his return to the wild. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Linda heard the familiar sound of paws on her porch. She moved quietly to the window and saw Sam depositing his latest gift, a plump rabbit. He looked up, meeting her eyes through the glass, and Linda felt the same connection she'd experienced that first day in the woods. "Thank you," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her through the window. She wasn't just thanking him for the rabbit, she was thanking him for everything. For trusting her when he was injured, for giving her purpose when she needed it most, and for showing her that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sam flicked his ears in acknowledgement, then melted back into the gathering darkness. Linda watched the space where he had been, thinking about the strange paths life sometimes leads us down. Her divorce, which had once seemed like the end of everything, had actually been the beginning of something extraordinary. Her decision to move to this remote cabin, which her friends and family had questioned, had led her to a relationship that changed not only her life but the lives of others through the ripple effects of their story. As she prepared for bed that night, Linda thought about how far she'd come from that lonely woman who had first moved to the cabin. She was still alone in many ways, but she no longer felt lonely. Her life was rich with purpose, filled with the joy of sharing her story, the satisfaction of her work at the library, and the peaceful knowledge that somewhere out in the darkness, a wild bobcat remembered her kindness and chose to return it in his own way. The next morning, Linda would remove Sam's latest gift and place it far from the cabin, as she always did, maintaining the delicate balance between their worlds. She would go about her day, perhaps work on her book, or prepare for the next children's reading hour. And she would keep an eye on the forest's edge, knowing that while Sam might not appear again for weeks or even months, their connection remained unbroken. Their story had become more than just a tale of a woman who nursed a bobcat back to health. It was a testament to the healing power of unexpected connections, the importance of knowing when to hold on and when to let go, and the beautiful truth that love, in all its forms, has the power to transform lives in ways we never could have imagined. As the moon rose over the Montana mountains, casting silver light through the trees, Linda smiled, feeling at peace with her place in the world. Sometimes, she realized, the greatest gifts come not from getting what we think we want, but from being open to what life brings us instead. For her, that gift had come in the form of a wounded bobcat who taught her that second chances often arrive in the most unexpected packages, and that the truest form of love sometimes means letting go, only to discover that what returns is even more precious than what was lost.